She had no choice but to marry him. A ruthless gangster feared by many. But when she finally gathered the courage to escape, she never expected what he would say next. Anita's life changed the moment she was forced into marriage with Ben, a man known for his violent ways, his reckless gambling, and a life filled with danger. She had endured, hoping for change, but when it never came, she made up her mind to leave. What she didn't know was that Ben had his own demons, and on the night of her escape, he was finally ready to face them. This is the story of a man with a dark past, a woman searching for freedom, and a journey that would change both of their lives forever. Why was Anita forced to marry Ben? Who arranged the marriage, and what was at stake? Anita never imagined that her life would turn out this way. One moment, she was a young woman with dreams, and the next, she was being told she had no choice but to marry a man she had never loved, a man everyone feared. It all started with her father, Mr. Okafor, a proud but struggling farmer. He was a man who had worked tirelessly his whole life, but no matter how hard he toiled, his debts only seemed to grow. The family's land, once fertile and rich, had suffered from years of drought. The harvests were poor, and soon creditors came knocking at their door. Among these creditors was Chief Odogwu, the wealthiest and most feared man in their village. He was a man of great influence, one whose name sent chills down the spines of many. He had lent Mr. Okafor a large sum of money, and when the old man failed to repay, Chief Odogwu demanded something in return. "You have nothing left to give," he had said, his deep voice like a thunderclap. "Nothing, except your daughter." Anita's mother wept, pleading with her husband to find another way. But there was no other way. The chief had made up his mind, and worse still, he was not asking for himself. The marriage was not for Chief Odogwu, but for his godson, Ben. Ben was a man whose name carried a dark reputation. He was known for his temper, his brawls, and his reckless ways. No one understood why the chief, a man so calculated, had taken him under his wing, but some said it was because Ben had no real family in the village. Others whispered that he had once saved the chief's life, and in return, Chief Odogwu had given him protection and power. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Ben was trouble. When Anita's father hesitated, the chief made his threat clear. If the debt was not paid or the marriage not arranged, he would take the land, the only thing keeping Anita's family from starvation. And so, against her will, Anita was married off to Ben. The wedding was nothing like she had imagined for herself. There was no joy, no laughter, only the hushed whispers of villagers who pitied her fate. Ben had stood beside her at the altar, emotionless, his face cold and unreadable. After the ceremony, Anita moved into his home, a small, unfinished house on the outskirts of the village. From the very first night, she realized the kind of life she had stepped into. Ben barely spoke to her. He spent most of his time gambling, drinking, or getting into fights. He came home at odd hours, bruised and smelling of trouble. Days turned into weeks, and Anita found herself trapped in a life that did not belong to her. She had been raised to believe that marriage was sacred, that a wife should be patient and endure. But how much could a person endure before they lost themselves? She tried to be strong. She cooked, cleaned, and took care of him as best as she could, even when he didn't seem to care. She told herself that maybe, with time, things would get better. But time only made things worse. The debt, the marriage, the weight of it all, it had stolen her freedom. And with each passing day, she felt like she was losing herself a little more. She wanted to run. She wanted to leave it all behind. But she had no idea that the man she was running from was just as broken as she was. Ben was never meant to live the life he had now. He was born into wealth, the only son of a powerful gold merchant. His father, Mr. Atawal, had built an empire from nothing, turning dust into riches. His mother, a woman of grace and wisdom, held their home together with quiet strength. And then there was Ivy, his little sister, the only person who had ever looked at him like he was a hero. From the moment he could understand words, Ben had been told what his future would be. He was to take over his father's business, expand it, make it even greater. He was taught how to recognize real gold from fake, how to negotiate, how to manage wealth. He had the best education, the best tutors, the best of everything. But the one thing he never had was freedom. Ben was suffocated by his father's expectations. Every decision was made for him, every step carefully planned. He wasn't allowed to dream of anything outside the family business. While other boys played in the streets, laughing and running, Ben was in his father's office, forced to watch men in suits discuss trade and profits. But Ivy was different. She was bright-eyed and full of wonder, always sneaking into his room at night to talk about silly things, fairy tales, the stars, the way she wanted to travel the world one day. She adored her big brother. To her, he wasn't just an heir to a fortune. He was someone who could do anything. As he grew older, the weight of his father's plans became unbearable. He didn't want to spend his life locked in offices, calculating numbers and shaking hands. He wanted to live on his own terms, to be free of the golden chains wrapped around him. So on the day he graduated from university, he made a decision that would change everything. He went to his father and demanded a large sum of money, enough to start his life somewhere else. Mr. Attawale refused at first, calling him reckless and ungrateful. But Ben's mother, who had always been his quiet protector, convinced his father to let him go. She saw the fire in her son's eyes, the determination that wouldn't be silenced. Ivy, however, did not understand. She was only 12, too young to grasp why her big brother was leaving. She clung to him the night before he left, begging him to stay. "Please, Ben, don't go. If you go, everything will change." But he had already made up his mind. He hugged her tightly, kissed the top of her head, and promised, "One day I'll come back for you." With the money in his hands and a heart full of dreams, Ben left home. But the world outside wasn't kind to dreamers. At first, things were good. He lived freely, spent carelessly, and did whatever he pleased. But money runs out faster than one expects, especially when there's no plan. He made bad choices, trusted the wrong people, and before he knew it, he was drowning in debt. To survive, he turned to gambling. At first, it was just a way to make quick money. He was smart, calculating, and for a while he won more than he lost. But gambling is a game designed to break even the cleverest men. Slowly, he spiraled. He borrowed money to bet, then borrowed more to pay his debts. The cycle never ended. Then came the fights. When words failed, fists spoke. If someone owed him, he fought for it. If he owed someone, he fought to escape. Soon, fighting became second nature to him. He learned to throw punches before questions, to strike first and think later. The man who had once lived in a mansion now lived in the streets, in unfinished buildings, in shadows. And the worst part, he never went back for Ivy. Years passed, and the boy who had once been the pride of his family became nothing more than a thug. The name Ben Attawale meant nothing in the world he now lived in. He was just Ben, the gambler, the fighter, the man who drank away his pain every night. He tried not to think about his past, about the little girl who had begged him not to leave. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between one fight and the next, he wondered if Ivy still thought of him, if she still waited for him, or if she had finally realized what he had always feared, that he wasn't a hero. He was just another lost cause. From the moment Anita stepped into Ben's house as his wife, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The house itself was barely a home. Unfinished walls, a leaky roof, and a small wooden table that wobbled whenever she placed food on it. There was no warmth, no sign that love had ever lived there. Just scattered bottles, unpaid bills, and the lingering smell of cheap alcohol. Her days began before the sun rose. She would wake up to the sound of Ben snoring loudly, sometimes with bruises on his face from another fight the night before. Anita would quietly step over discarded clothes and broken furniture to prepare breakfast. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to survive. If she didn't cook, she wouldn't eat. She would serve him food and sometimes he wouldn't even touch it. Other times he would eat in silence, not a single word of gratitude escaping his lips. If he was in a bad mood, which was often, he would push the plate away, complaining that he wasn't hungry. But the worst part wasn't his silence, it was his absence. Ben would leave early, sometimes without saying where he was going, and come back late at night, smelling of alcohol, sweat, and regret. There were nights he didn't come home at all, and Anita would sit on the cold bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she had done to deserve this life. She wasn't just a wife, she was a prisoner. People in the village whispered behind her back, calling her the gangster's wife. No one dared to say it to her face, but she could feel their pity, their judgment. Some women warned their daughters to stay away from her. They feared Ben, and by extension, they feared her. Still, Anita tried. She tried to bring some order into the chaos of their marriage. She cleaned the house every morning, even though Ben would come back and make a mess of it again. She washed his clothes, even though they reeked of alcohol and blood. She prayed for him, even though she wasn't sure if God was listening. She tried to talk to him. On nights when he was only slightly drunk, she would sit beside him and ask about his day. He rarely answered, and when he did, his words were short and cold. But she noticed things. She noticed how his hands trembled when he thought she wasn't looking, how he sighed deeply when he sat alone in the dark, how despite his hardened exterior, there were moments, tiny, fleeting moments, when he seemed tired. Not just physically, but in his soul. That was the part of him she clung to. She told herself that maybe, just maybe, there was a good man buried beneath all the anger, the fights, the debts. A man who could change, a man she could one day love. But hope was a cruel thing, because every time she thought things might get better, something happened to remind her that this wasn't a fairy tale. One night, Ben came home with a fresh cut above his eye. Anita rushed to get a cloth and warm water, but as she dabbed at his wound, he grabbed her wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but his eyes were sharp, dark. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice low. Anita hesitated. She wanted to say, "Because I have to," because she didn't have a choice, because she had nowhere else to go. Instead, she said, "Because you're my husband." He let go of her wrist and laughed, a bitter, empty laugh. Husband. That word meant nothing to him. And at that moment, Anita realized it was beginning to mean nothing to her too. She had done everything she could. She had cooked, cleaned, endured his coldness, his absences, his gambling, his fights. She had swallowed her pride, ignored the gossip, and convinced herself that one day he might change. But she was running out of patience. She was running out of hope. And she knew, deep down, that if something didn't change soon, she would. Anita moved swiftly, her hands trembling as she stuffed the last of her belongings into a small, worn-out bag. She had planned everything carefully. She would leave in the dead of night, while Ben was out, like he usually was. But tonight, luck was not on her side. Just as she reached for the door, the old hinges let out a soft creak. She froze. Then a voice behind her. "Going somewhere?" Anita's heart slammed against her chest. She turned swiftly, hiding the bag behind her. Ben stood there, his broad frame leaning against the door frame, his face shadowed by the dim glow of the lantern. His shirt was wrinkled, stained with the faint traces of dried blood from yet another fight. His eyes, however, were different tonight, tired, almost defeated. She braced herself for the storm. She had expected rage, demands, maybe even threats. But instead, Ben sighed and ran a hand through his already messy hair. "I figured you'd try to leave at some point," he muttered. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was empty. Anita narrowed her eyes. "And you're not going to stop me?" He exhaled, stepping closer. I want to go with you." She blinked, completely taken aback. "What?" Ben gave a small, humorless chuckle. "You think you're the only one tired of this?" He gestured around the dimly lit room, the cracked walls, the broken furniture, the life he had dragged her into. "You think I don't see how miserable you are? How much you hate this marriage?" "I know, Anita. And the truth is, I hate it too." Anita's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She had braced herself for everything: anger, resistance, even violence. But this, she didn't know what to do with this. "I can't do this anymore," she finally said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Whatever this is, it isn't a marriage. I've tried, I've endured, I've been patient. But I've reached my limit, Ben." He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, as if he had already accepted this long before she spoke the words. "I know," he murmured. Anita frowned. "You know what? I know you're tired," he said, his voice low. "I can see it in your eyes. And the truth is, I'm tired too. She had spent so long preparing to fight, to defend herself, that his words knocked the air out of her lungs. Then why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why have you made my life a living hell? Why have you let yourself live like this? Ben let out a slow, shaky breath. Because I didn't know how to stop. He turned away for a moment, staring at the ground as if the words were difficult to say. I've been living like a fool, Anita, he admitted. Gambling, fighting, running from my debts. It's a cycle I can't seem to break. I win money, I lose money. I beat someone up, someone beats me up. And for what? A miserable life in an unfinished house drinking my pain away? His voice cracked slightly. I can't do it anymore. Anita swallowed hard, watching him. This was not the Ben she knew. This was not the brute who stormed in and out of their home, wreaking havoc wherever he went. When I was forced to marry you, I thought you'd be just another problem in my life, he continued. Just another burden. He let out a small, bitter laugh. But these past few days, I've been watching you, and for the first time I realized something. You're not like me. You don't complain, even when you have every right to. You still cook for me, clean up after me, take care of me, even though I've given you nothing but pain in return. Anita looked away, her chest tightening. You've been better to me than I deserve, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he looked straight into her eyes and said something that made her heart stop. I want to change. Silence stretched between them. The words felt heavy, almost foreign coming from his mouth. Anita let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. You. Change. Yes, he said firmly. I know it sounds ridiculous. She studied his face, searching for deceit, for manipulation. But for the first time since she had known him, she saw something else. Sincerity, maybe even regret. But she wasn't ready to believe him. Not yet. You say you want to change, she said, folding her arms. But what does that even mean, Ben? What do you expect from me? To clap for you? To wait while you figure yourself out? Do you really think words are enough? Ben looked down as if ashamed. I don't expect anything from you. He paused, then met her eyes again. I just needed you to know. Anita's grip on her bag loosened. She had already made up her mind to leave. So why did she suddenly feel so conflicted? Ben let out a deep breath. If you're leaving, I'm leaving too. Not just this house, Anita. This life. I can't promise you miracles, and I know I've done nothing to earn your trust. But if there's even the slightest chance that I can be better, then I have to take it. Anita's heart pounded in her chest. A part of her wanted to believe him. A part of her whispered, what if he's just saying this to make you stay? But before she could speak, Ben stepped forward and did something he had never done before. He took her hand, not in force, not in anger, but gently. Please, he said softly, let's leave together. The bus rumbled along the winding road, cutting through the early morning mist. The world outside was still waking up. Farmers heading to their fields, shopkeepers setting up their stalls. But inside the bus, Anita sat stiffly, her hands clenched in her lap. She had barely spoken since they left. Ben, sitting beside her, noticed. He had expected this. She didn't trust him. Why would she? A few words weren't enough to erase months of pain. Still, he had hoped she would at least believe that he was trying. You haven't said anything since we left, Ben finally murmured. Anita glanced at him, then turned away, watching the trees blur past. What do you want me to say? She asked, her voice quiet. I don't know, Ben admitted. Anything. She sighed. I don't understand you, Ben. One moment you're this heartless man I can't escape from, and the next, you're saying you want to change. It doesn't make sense. Ben leaned back against his seat, staring at the ceiling of the bus. I don't blame you for thinking that. I don't even know if I deserve a second chance. Anita turned to him sharply. Then why are you doing this? Ben hesitated before answering. Because I'm tired of being that man. I don't want to wake up every day feeling like my life is nothing but a series of bad decisions. And I don't want you to suffer because of them anymore. Anita searched his face for any sign of deception, but all she saw was exhaustion. Real, deep exhaustion. It wasn't just physical. It was the kind that settled in a person's soul, the kind that came from years of living the wrong way. She didn't say anything. She wasn't ready to believe him yet. The bus continued down the bumpy road, stopping occasionally to pick up more passengers. Anita kept her distance, both physically and emotionally, but Ben didn't push her. Hours passed. The sun rose higher in the sky. The bus made a stop in a small town, and people got off to stretch their legs. Anita hesitated, then stepped out too, wanting a moment away from Ben. She stood by a fruit stall, watching a little girl hold her mother's hand tightly as they picked mangoes together. "You like mangoes?" She turned to see Ben standing beside her, holding two in his hands. She blinked in surprise. "Why did you buy those?" Ben shrugged. "You haven't eaten all day." Anita frowned, but when he offered her one, she took it. Not because she was touched by the gesture, she told herself, but because she was hungry. They stood there in silence, peeling the fruit, sticky juice running down their fingers. "You used to be like that, you know," Ben said suddenly. Anita looked at him. "Like what?" "Like that little girl," he said, nodding toward the child. "Carefree, happy. Before all this." Anita felt a lump rise in her throat but swallowed it down. "People change," she said simply. Ben exhaled. "Yeah, they do." They got back on the bus, and the journey continued. As the afternoon stretched on, Anita caught herself sneaking glances at Ben. He wasn't the same man who used to come home late, drunk and covered in bruises. There was something different about him now, something quieter, more thoughtful. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. As the bus neared the outskirts of the city, Anita's nerves tightened. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" she asked. Ben chuckled. "I know I've been gone for years, but I think I still remember my own home." Home. The word felt foreign coming from him. She wanted to ask what kind of life he had left behind, what kind of family he was returning to, but she held her questions back. If he was truly serious about change, she would see it with her own eyes soon enough. For now, all she could do was wait. As the bus rumbled to a stop at the city's crowded terminal, Anita took a deep breath. The air smelled different, smoky, busy, alive. She had imagined this moment 100 times, stepping off the bus, leaving her old life behind. But now that they were here, she wasn't sure what to feel. Ben stretched and grabbed their small bags. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. Anita hesitated for a second before taking it. She reminded herself this didn't mean she trusted him. She was just exhausted. The streets were buzzing with activity, cars honking, vendors shouting, people rushing past them. Anita clutched her bag tightly, feeling out of place. Ben, on the other hand, moved like he had been here all his life. But then again, he had. "I know a place we can stay," he said over the noise. Anita nodded, too tired to argue. They walked for a while before stopping in front of an old motel. It wasn't much, but it was better than the tiny, unfinished house they had left behind. Ben spoke to the receptionist, paid for a room, and led Anita inside. The moment the door shut behind them, she let out a long breath. "We made it," he said. She gave a small nod, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Now what?" Ben ran a hand through his hair. "Now, I try to fix my life." Anita studied him. He looked serious, but she had heard too many empty promises to believe in words alone. "We'll see," she murmured. That night, for the first time in a long time, Anita slept peacefully. But peace didn't last long. The past comes knocking. The next morning, Anita woke up to a loud knock at the door. Ben was already up, staring at the door like he expected trouble. "Who is it?" Anita whispered, feeling a sudden wave of unease. Ben didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door slightly, just enough to see who was outside. A tall man in a black suit stood there, his arms crossed. Behind him, 2 other men, just as serious, just as intimidating. "Ben," the man said in a low, sharp voice, "you've been gone a long time." Anita saw the tension in Ben's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. "I'm done with that life," Ben said, his voice calm but firm. The man chuckled. "Is that so? And what about the money you owe?" Anita's stomach dropped. "Money? Again?" Ben didn't move. "I don't have it." The man's smile faded. "That's a shame." In an instant, one of the men pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. Anita jumped to her feet. "What is this?" she demanded, her heart pounding. The man ignored her, his eyes fixed on Ben. The boss isn't happy, Ben. You disappeared for months. You think you can just run? I'm not running, Ben said. I came back to make things right. The man scoffed. Then pay what you owe. Ben exhaled sharply. I don't have it, not yet. The man gave him a long look, then turned to Anita. She your wife? Ben tensed. Leave her out of this. The man smirked. That depends on you, Ben. Anita felt cold all over. She thought they had escaped. She thought Ben was finally free. But she was wrong. His past had followed them, and now it was standing right in front of them, demanding payment. Give me a week, Ben said suddenly. The man tilted his head. A week? I'll get your money, Ben promised. Anita stared at him in shock. Where was he going to find that kind of money? The man thought for a moment, then nodded. 1 week, no more. He glanced at Anita once more before turning to leave. Don't disappoint us, Ben. The door shut and the room fell silent. Anita swallowed hard. What just happened? Ben ran a hand over his face. I owe them money, a lot of money. Ben, she shook her head in disbelief. We were supposed to start over. I know. His voice was low, filled with regret. And I will. But first I have to fix this. Anita felt a lump in her throat. She had spent so long trying to escape a life of fear, and now it felt like she had walked straight into another one. She didn't know what scared her more, that Ben might not get the money in time, or that he might go back to his old ways to get it. Either way, their fresh start had just turned into a nightmare.